Please don't pay too much attention to all the information up on the screen just yet. I know there's a lot of it, but we're going to go through it together and hopefully it will make perfect sense by the end. I provided some animated boobaps up here in the meantime. There's some overbite and some underbite, so hopefully that should get us through the intro. Now, Namco are rolling out their new native frame data feature for Tekken 7, and there's been a bit of controversy. Not everybody's happy with spending the money on it, either because they feel they don't have the money or because they want to stand on principle. And I can really respect that. So I wanted to make a video talking about how you can teach yourself frame data and things like block punishment without relying on in-game features. It's not as difficult as it might sound. It can honestly be a lot of fun, and it's the way we all had to do it before the invention of things like Tekken Bot for the PC. Now, the first thing you should probably realize about frame data when you start learning about it is that high-level players don't memorize all the numbers in the game. That's a little bit too hard. It can honestly be counterproductive. But the good news is you don't have to, because in Tekken, frame data is homogenized. You hear a lot of people talk about how Tekken is such a balanced game and how there's inherent balance in the system, and that comes from the homogenized frame data. If you have a move with a certain impact speed or a move that fills a certain role, has a certain niche or purpose, it tends to have similar or identical frame data to other moves in the game that fall into that same category. And so if you can break all the moves in the game down into these categories and understand them, then all you have to do is memorize the outliers, the moves that deviate from the pattern, and now you've reduced the number of moves that you need to worry about by a lot. It's obviously true, of course, that you should focus on moves that are useful as well, ones that are actually likely to show up in game, but I haven't seen a breakdown of these sort of move categories before on YouTube. They probably exist, but it's something that you tend to notice as a beginner, learn multiple characters and you start noticing the similarities in between them. So I wanted to try and do a breakdown of that in this video. And then by the end, I'm also going to talk about how I practice specifically block punishment and how you can do that. I'm going to show a clip of me doing that as well. But if we start at the top here at 10 frames, 10 frames is where you find all the fastest moves in the game. For almost any given character, the fastest move they have will be a 10 frame move and some sort of small natural string that they can use for a 10 frame block punisher. And moves that are this fast will always be high. There are, of course, exceptions, but we're not really worried about exceptions. We're trying to, break it down into manageable chunks. Another reason 10 frames is an important number is because if the fastest moves exist at 10 frames, it means that if something is -9 or less on block, there's no move in the game that is fast enough to get a, guaranteed hit. And so this is where we draw the line for when something is safe or punishable. If it's -10 or more, we call it unsafe. If it's -9 or less, we call it safe. So that's what that means most of the time. At 11 frames is where you find your high counter hit launchers, and this is where you find your Magic 4 category, for example, for characters like Kazumi and Katarina, and also counter hit moves like the back one from Miguel. You're not going to have any mid launchers or mid counter hit launchers that are this fast, but counter hit high launchers do exist at this speed. So 11 is an important number to sort of keep in mind when it comes to those moves. At 12 frames is where you're going to find your fastest mid for the characters that do have a 12 frame mid. Not everybody does. I tend to categorize all the 12 frame mids into a category that I call fish hooks. It's named after a move from Feng, but they tend to be these small, for some reason, really fast kicking attacks with a large amount of disadvantage on block. The reason the disadvantage on block is really important is if you had a very repeatable mid that wasn't that bad on block, that was 12 frames, it would be very oppressive. You could lock people down with that and create a lot of claustrophobia, especially if the opponent didn't have, a 12 frame mid of their own and they couldn't keep up with you in that space. So the reason these moves exist and the way you use them is for interruption and for round ending and stuff like that. When you need a mid that is as fast as possible to stop pressure and just get something in, and if you get a hit, you get a little bit of advantage and you can work off of that, but they're not supposed to be repeatable. They're mainly interruption tools. And not every character has this, and so this is where you have to start to notice, the patterns. If you go into the frame data, which is available on RB Norway, which is probably the best compilation of frame data for Tekken 7 on the internet, and you notice the fact that there are 12 frame mids in your character's move list, that means that you have a very fast and very useful move, and so it's something to pick up on and notice as a strength of your particular character. Moving up to 13, this is where you find the standard mid pokes and the fastest mids for a lot of characters. The most standard fastest mid will be 13 frames, and this is where you have the down forward 1 category. So down forward 1 from Miguel, for example, down forward 1 from Lars, back 3 from Claudio. Unless something's changed in the 2 or 3 years I haven't looked at Claudio's frame data. And these pokes tend to have better frame data on block than the fish hooks we talked about earlier. The fish hooks are like down forward 4 from Elisa, down forward 4 from Elisa, and moves like that, back 3 from Katarina, and so on. But these ones are better on block, and they become very versatile for that reason. They're sort of your universal Swiss Army knife, because if you just want to do something low risk and useful, you just want to occupy the screen with some sort of attack, this is where you go. You can tie them together with movement to set up all kinds of launchers. You use them to set up counter hits. You use them to catch people who are going to go into crouch and do high crush stuff. You open the round with them, you end the round with them. They're just overall, and you float with them in combos all the time. So these moves are super, super important, super good. And I think your fastest best mid poke is one of your best friends and something you want to be really intimate with. So when you find your best mid poke that you want to use, whether it's a down forward 1 or back 2 in the case of Bob, this is a move where I recommend you actually remember all of the particular numbers, exactly what you get on hit, exactly what you get on block, and what you can do and what that means, and how you can move in conjunction with it. It's a very important move category in my opinion, and something that I use a lot. Moving on to 15, this is where you're going to find the standard, fast mid launchers in the game. Almost all the characters in the game will have their fastest standard normal hit launcher at 15. And again, it's something to notice here. If your character has that at 14, it means they have something exceptionally fast. It's probably made up for by the fact that the move is either difficult to do, has bad range, or is, shitty in some other way. And then some unfortunate characters have to wait until 16 to get their fastest launcher, but that is usually, again, made up for by the fact that it has crush properties or good range or something like that. And 15 is also usually where you find your first counter hit mid launchers that are safe on block. So they're kind of like a slowish version of the 13 frame mid poke, but the upside is that you get the potential for a counter hit launch. So that's moves like down forward 4 from Katarina, and so on. So those are usually going to be safe. The launchers, the normal hit launchers are going to have variable frame data depending on what category they fall into. We're going to talk a little bit about that later. If we move on to these sort of move categories that I've put here on the bottom, just talking about generic one jabs. I've made a video talking about this before, but they're such an important move category that I think new players maybe sleep on. And almost every character in the game, again, will have a normal one jab that gives them 1 frame of advantage on block and 8 frames of advantage on hit. That's almost completely normalized. And notice that it's extremely rare and extremely good to have a move that gives you advantage on both hit and block. Usually when that happens, the move will be very slow to impact. It's stuff like, back 3 from Miguel, a long sort of orbital shaped kind of kick. But this is the fastest move in the game and always leads to advantage, and it's why one jabs are so important. The reason they've designed them to be this way, I think, is that they want to there to be a go-to stalemate breaker and offense opener in the game, a sort of can opener that you can go in with, and it's always going to lead to at least a little bit of momentum so that the game doesn't become very stale. And you will see good players use one jabs a lot for just generic poking purposes, and when they find that +8, then they try and build offense on top of that. But it is a very important move category. But if you go to your frame data right now and check it out, you're probably going to find that you have exactly +1, +8 for your normal one jab. Hop kicks are an interesting move category. The reason they're special is I've talked a lot about how safety is almost a bit of a problem in Tekken 7 because so many good characters can just keep on performing offense without really putting themselves at risk of block punishment. But hop kicks are a category of move that do get used, especially online, but can be block punished. A normal hop kick will be minus 12 on block, and so it's important to find out what is the most powerful thing you can do for a punish. If you have something really amazing for 10, like your Gigas, or if you have something great for 11. A lot of characters usually get a powerful knockdown move of about 30 damage around 12. If you find that and you have that, it's very important to apply it when your opponent is abusing the hop kick, because a hop kick is abusable in the sense that it's usually mid, it's got good range, it's going to crush lows, and so it's just likely to hit for whatever reason when it gets performed, and that's why you get, people talk about hope kicks and so on. And it's abusable in that sense. So if your opponent is throwing out hop kicks and getting them blocked, you need to punish them hard to make sure that they don't have access to this abusable tool. There are some hop kicks in the game that are very good in terms of range or something else, like crush properties, and they are usually balanced by making them minus 13 instead of minus 12, and you can get a little bit more damage. So that's moves like Claudio's hop kick, for example. So that's a small distinction to make, but every hop kick will be at least minus 12. And then down for 2 uppercuts. This is a kind of interesting move category because it has subcategories. If it's a normal short-range launcher that doesn't launch people who crouch, it will usually be safe at around minus 7, 8, or 9. But if it has powerful properties in terms of really good range, or it can launch crouchers, or both, like in the case of Jack, it will be punishable, usually in sort of the same region as a hop kick, minus 12 to 14. And it's interesting to notice, and I think it's really educational to ask yourself these questions. Why would they design it that way? Well, I think the reason a down 4-2 that can't launch crouchers gets to be safe is the fact that they want you to be able to use it for keep out and for block punishment, but they don't want you to be able to apply this move as part of a 50-50 mix-up. So you're applying a 50-50 mix-up between a mid and a low. Your opponent's choice is to stand block or crouch block, and if you have a completely safe mid down 4-2 that you can just do without exposing yourself to any risk of damage, but you stand to get an entire combo, that's very oppressive. And so I think that's why they've made those moves not launch crouchers. It's kind of interesting, but if you have a down 4-2 or you play against a lot of down 4-2 with your opponent characters, I think this is another move category where you should go in and look at the specific numbers, because they're kind of variable, but they do have subcategories, and there is rhyme and reason and patterns in there. Orbitals are kind of like hop kicks, but it's when you get an animation when somebody, flops their leg around their entire character. And these moves have slower impact speed than hop kicks, and that is why they get to be safe on block. So, very, very powerful move category. You can use them for mix-ups if they're fast enough, but you expose yourself to very low risk. So if somebody's abusing orbitals against you, which they usually will if they have access to it, whether it's Shaheen, Lars, or Brian, be aware that they're usually going to be safe on block, and don't try and punish them because they're very prepared for that because they're used to it. One tip is if somebody's doing a lot of orbitals, consider looking out for down jabs. After an orbital on block, a lot of people like to go into a down jab to regain the momentum, and if you can find that with a low parry, it's an opportunity to punish somebody for using a lot of orbitals and getting a bit of damage in. And if we're going to talk about lows, fast unseeable low pokes moves in this category will almost always be minus 12 to 13. So if you have something nice and chunky for your 11 frame while standing Punisher, which will be your while standing 4 most of the time, maybe 1 if you're a character like Gigas, you can apply that nice and easy and know that you're always going to get something, at least a bit of damage. If you want to get into the nitty gritty of very common low pokes and find out if they're exactly, minus 12 or 13 and punish accordingly, that's very good, because a lot of characters have something powerful and strong for minus 12 or minus 13 from while standing. But one very important thing to notice in the matchup, or if you play one of these characters, is that a few characters in the game, it's very rare, but a few characters can actually launch opponents with a 13 frame while standing launcher, and it means that they can launch some of the common generic low pokes in the game, Kazuya, Josie, and so on. And if you play those characters, or you play against them, or you apply a lot of low pokes that are specifically minus 13, that is something to be very aware of, because if your opponent is good and awake and knows frame data, then you might get launched where you would usually only eat something tiny like a while standing 4. If a low has knockdown properties, or it just straight up leads to a launch like a snake edge, it will pretty much always be launch punishable on block, and you can get a big powerful launch. Most characters in the game get their first launch from while standing at 15, so the same as standing. But like I said, some get 13, some get 14, and some have to wait for higher or slower impact speed than 15 to get it. So being aware of the impact speed of your fastest launcher from while standing is important. If you have access to a hop kick, be aware that you can actually perform that from crouch and get it out, because the up forward input of the hop kick will cancel the crouch. So that can actually be your best option when you're trying to launch from while standing. I've put it on the bottom here, I've mentioned it before, but if you notice a move in your move list that seems to deviate or be faster than what I've described so far, it's either because the move has some sort of weakness to make up for that, or it's a standout powerful move and a great tool for your character that you should probably worry about strategizing around or using. Now I want to move on to block punishment here. I think that the block punishment feature that is coming to the game is going to be completely available for everybody, whether you buy it or not. But I think practicing block punishment the old school way is still going to be very useful. The reason I say that is the feature is going to, make the opponent perform a move and then tell you what punish to do. But in a real match scenario, the problem is not knowing which punish you should do. It's honestly reacting in time, having the judgment, the reflexes, and the experience to apply that strong punish, with good reaction time. And there's an easy way to practice that I'm going to show you. I have a small clip here of me practicing my block punishment against Katarina. And the way I do this is I take an opponent character that I want to practice against, and then I record usually 3 moves, and I make the AI as likely to perform, all of the moves. So 30-something% chance to do all of the moves, and I have something that I have to punish with 10 frames, something that I should launch punish that I can, something that is minus 15 or more, and then something that is sort of in between like a hop kick. I mix that, I press play, I make my opponent perform the moves, and then I try and punish with strong punishing options accordingly. When you start out trying to learn about block punishment, one big tip I want to give you is, again, break it down and categorize it. If you can categorize your opponent's moves into 3 categories and remember them, you've gotten very far with block punishment, and then you can build on that as your knowledge of the game becomes more sophisticated. The 3 categories are moves that are safe that I cannot punish, moves that I can punish, and moves that are launch punishable. And if you know that the move is punishable at all and you have something decent for 10 frames, get that in, get a bit of advantage, get a bit of damage, and you've at least done something. And then you can worry about stuff like, oh, this is specifically minus 13, so I can actually get something quite chunky here later as you progress. But if you see something that is launch punishable, it's very important to try and capitalize with that launch, because one single combo worth of damage in Tekken right now is so huge. It's usually the difference between winning and losing a round, so capitalizing on that is very important. You've probably noticed that the sun has been going down as I'm recording this, so it's getting darker and darker in my room. I'm kind of glad I managed to do it before it got completely dark. But I'm going to cut to a clip of me using that block punishment practicing technique that I mentioned. It's honestly going to be a good way to do it even when the new feature comes out, so consider using that. But I hope this video was reasonably useful and that you learned something. You don't need these features. They're going to be very useful. It's it's a cool idea for something to put in the game. But if you don't feel like buying them, then definitely don't feel compelled to, because you can become like the most advanced expert on frame data in the world without using them at all. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys again very soon. Bye bye for now.